Welcome to the Racing Nuggets podcast. I'm PJ Noodleman, joined by my co-host Dan Plan. How you doing, Dan?
Good to see Steve and Nick on the show too. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, our guests also hail from Minnesota like Dan. Please welcome Steve and Nick Murgic. Hey guys.
How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having us. Good to see you.
Yeah, you guys have the shop that you're working in up there in Minnesota. It's a shop, Steve, I guess that your dad actually started, right? And you're continuing it on?
Well, we were partners when we started it, but that was 45 years ago. And yeah, I was still here, I guess.
Nice. So, Nick, what was that like for you being able to kind of get hands-on on the back end of what racing is all about growing up? I mean, had to have been amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of all I knew. We had at our house, which is about a mile away, they had a modified in the garage, which is where they worked on the race cars at the time when I was growing up. And they were trying to make money here, so they didn't have too many projects going on. But yeah, I'd come over on the weekends and get all messy and dirty. And I don't know if I did anything useful, but for a lot of years, I'd spend every weekend as many nights as I could. Winter nights like this, by the time I was 8, I could drive. So I would be driving cars around the shop lap after lap. What you were just saying? I had an old Mercury. I don't even know.
Mercury Scorpio, and snowed one Sunday all day long, and I think he spent all day driving around the shop with it there, just sliding it sideways when he was away from the cars and stuff like that. And had heated seats and radio cranked, and he'd just go all day long.
Rear wheel drive, back in the heyday, no traction control, stuff like that. So a lot of fun. Wish they had that now.
I was going to say that probably helped you a little bit as you made a transition to dirt here recently too, if you learned the car control that way.
I don't know if anything helped me for that. I guess it's been something else, but the guy I bought the car from said, "Oh, you'll get the hang of it eventually," and that was all he could say. And I'm like, well, that doesn't help me much. But towards the end, I only got about 10 races in this last year. About 6 or 7 in, I started getting used to it, and got some pretty good top 10s, and eventually started need to work on the car. So driver got it figured out, and just didn't race consistently enough last year to really take advantage of it. It's like anything, football players don't play 4 times a year. They practice all the time and get as many reps as possible. So that's going to change this year. We got to get serious, I guess. We want to do well. Oh, there we go.
Always working.
Yeah. Oh, that's my mom.
Murgic. We're on the podcast.
I get the real.
Hilarious.
I'm gonna call the shop next.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Her time is great.
I love that. That's great. So you're talking about the dirt racing. What made you want to go dirt racing? Because your whole family, I mean, you're a 3rd generation racer, Nick, and it's always been asphalt. What made you want to go try dirt?
Well, I think my grandpa did start on dirt back in the 50s, I suppose you could say. How's the story go? Tell the story really quick, then we'll get back to my dirt racing about when he started at the service station.
He'd worked for a guy at a service station that had a race car in Illinois, and the driver had some issues where he couldn't show up. So they said, "Well, you want to drive?" And so he got in and drove, which apparently did okay. And those cars back in the day, they weren't very special. And I don't know if anybody knew really what was going on. They were out there having fun. But it actually paid pretty good, so he thought he'd stick with it. And I don't have all the information, but and when they cut the original tracks were dirt around here, and they eventually switched over, and it was just closer, so he stayed, on the asphalt. And that being said, Nick spent all those years trying to perfect his skills on the asphalt, where you don't slide, you don't spin your tires, and you're under complete control. You know where everybody is in your mirror. And then he
Yeah.
goes to that dirt where there are no mirrors, and you're not under any kind of control. Well, a little control, but it's, hard to tell. And he was so nervous without having mirrors and knowing where everybody was at the beginning there. I was petrified, and I'm sure he was worse.
Yeah. Well, get back to the question, I guess. The reason was as life changes, you get busier, get older, more responsibilities. I bought some land back when I lived at home and I actually worked at Vic's Crane, who sponsored me for a bunch of years. They're a local Rosemount company as well. And so at the time I bought some land and I'm like, I'm going to build this cool race shop. It's going to be so awesome. And I did finally after four-ish years of owning it. And then you got to start paying for it. So, so then you got to work more. You can't be skipping work as much. And so really the traveling just got challenging as all my crew members, our friends and family, they got older, start to have families or, different hobbies and whatnot. The commitment gets challenging as people get older. So really we kind of scaled back and ran really limited schedule there on asphalt for a while, which was manageable. But again, it's hard to do well when you're only running 5 times, say, a summer. And that's just not in our blood to do average. So went back to run the limited late models for a few years there and had a lot of fun at lacrosse and some of the Elko races and had some pretty decent success. But the traveling again, just weekly and getting into the points mix. The second year I ran lacrosse, I wasn't going to run for points. But like, we're just going to have fun, and of course I win opening night. So then you're kind of tied into it. But really just try to manage the family business here. I came back to work a couple years ago, and the fun part about family businesses, there's always something to work on. So you can work on Saturdays, Sundays, weekends, holidays, it doesn't matter. So again, the commitment there is challenging. So the dirt stuff, we got a couple tracks close to home within about an hour. Really can't practice because the track changes. So you leave at 3:00, shoot over there, run your couple of races, and come back home. And it's definitely challenging, but you don't need a spotter. They let you buy tires beforehand and have them mounted up at site. And there's a little bit more work on that end, but it was myself and my fiance a couple nights this year, and then a couple people meet up as the night went on if they could. But it was kind of neat because it didn't take a huge commitment from everybody else. So it's just kind of trying to stay close to home and have a little more fun. Again, not exactly what I intended for if you look back 5 years ago, but that's just how things go.
I didn't realize until opening night at Cedar Lake this year when I was talking to your dad that he'd actually ran dirt before. I think it was a last minute deal. The nice just showed up at your house the next morning or something after racing at Elko.
Yeah, Tom broke his foot unloading the car off the trailer. It ran over his foot, and there was a race Sunday afternoon. Of course, we were out at the campfire at Elko for quite a while, and I was thinking it was Sunday night show. Nope, it was Sunday afternoon. So they came and got me and rushed me down to County Fair down Fair. I don't remember. It was south of here, a couple hour maybe, and it was really hot and sunny and so dusty. I didn't know what I was doing. Never driven on the dirt before, and then when you couldn't see where you're going, it was kind of scary. But after I could see people there, then I managed to pass a bunch of cars. But yeah, I did it twice. It was fun, but I didn't really know what I was doing.
I actually had shown this to Nick earlier this year. It's from the '78 Elko program. I'm sure you remember me as an 11-year-old kid getting your autograph that day. It's actually on that piece of paper there. But were those
Wow.
cars back then? So they were called the B late models, and I believe they were the same thing they were running at Raceway Park with the street tires, but at Elko you had the 10-inch tires on them. Is that really the only difference between the two at the time?
Yeah, basically they were trying to have a class to use up the tires from the late model class, where you'd have to buy a used tire, had to be under so much tread on left on it and compete. And the tires were cheap, but the speeds were higher and the cars weren't that well built. The street tires are probably more the right thing for that particular car. But it was something they're trying to do, and it was kind of fun. It gave us experience at higher speed and with bigger tires and so on. First thing, you need more power, and it kind of escalates there. But that's a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, with those cars, were they, was that like a '68 Camaro that you put frame connectors in, or were those Howe chassis and stuff by then?
No, those were regular Camaros with poorly built frame connectors and marginal welding at best on all of it. Yeah, those come a long way in the fabrication department there. I told Nick here not too long ago how we had arc welders and we didn't know how to fit tubes properly, and we just did the best we could. Luckily, most people survived.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were my earliest memories of you. Did you race like hobbies or anything before you ran the late models at Elko?
Well, there was a kind of a, back in the days, I had a hobby and then a sportsman, I guess we'll say, and then the late models. And the sportsmen's were in between. That's where I started. It was with a Camaro, 67 Camaro. That was, again, by today's standards, terrible. But anyways, it's all we knew, and it was probably better than some of the stuff my dad had raced earlier. Much better than what my dad had raced earlier before he got a Howe car. But yeah, we got it out, all the old panels, and modified whatever needed to be modified, and went to salvage yards to forage for parts. And yeah, it's not like you just ordered it up from the left-hander or whoever and bolted it on. It was pretty much handmade everything.
Then I think, if I remember correctly, when they dropped the supers and then you won the limited late model championship, and then was it right after that then you went Artgo ASA type racing then?
Yeah, in the early 80s, I got an opportunity to drive a car for Jim Daly and Jim Tabata, and that was quite an opportunity. I got to go to race in Wisconsin with Ruffner and Merzofka and Trickle, Mike Miller, Larry Degens. I mean, these are all guys that I'd watched when I was young and considered heroes in my book. And for me to go to La Crosse and get to race with them was quite a thrill. And I didn't really feel I belonged there, but they accepted me, and it was quite a good time.
I was just looking at there's a website that has driver history on it, and it shows you had quite a few top tens in the Artgo series back then. So that's racing against them guys. That's quite an accomplishment to go over there and get a top 10 finish.
Well, yeah, of course we were trying to do better, and still learning. And I don't know if the Minnesota racers were really as sharp as Wisconsin racers overall, but I tried to learn, and I got a little help from Dick and Mike Miller now and then would say, try this or try that. And so I was doing the best I could to learn, and it was very helpful. But the respect that those guys raced with was the important part. The Minnesota guys would always kind of see you in their mirror and then drive you poorly. And go to Wisconsin and they'd see you and they'd give you a groove. And if you could pass them, then great. And if you couldn't, they'd You just race you, like anybody else. And that was the fun part because, I was doing well in Elko, and you come up to them and then you'd have to kind of figure out how to get by them because they would block you so well. And first time I went to the Dells, I had started in the back of a semi feature, and everybody I came up to just gave me a groove. And I thought, wow, I think I died and went to heaven. At one point, I wanted to get a post office box in Wisconsin so I could be considered a Wisconsin racer.
Now, I know you did that for a number of years, and then you returned back to racing at that Elko and Raceway. But what had you, give up the Artco ASA stuff and return to racing closer to home?
Well, it's again the traveling and the commitment. Pretty hard to make money when you're out spending it. And actually, my dad had raced at Elko when I was traveling, and he got into the NASCAR points when they had the Winston Racing Series here, and he did pretty good. And it paid reasonably good in the for the points. So when I came back to race locally here, we were racing for the NASCAR points, and between Elko and Raceway, like 1989, we had like 13 victories between the two tracks. I got third in the regional points, and in '89 that was almost $9,000 in point money, which was pretty good. And it was challenging. Wasn't as much fun as racing with the guys in Wisconsin, but it was manageable because we could leave at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon and 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon and get to the track and race and get home by 11, 12, whatever. And got my need for speed, I guess we'll say.
I remember when the Northern Series first started and your dad was still racing, and I think he won the last chance qualifier at Elko, and that place went nuts. It had to have been close to one of the last races he drove, and I was just amazed that many people still remembered Mike Murgic and how loud the crowd was.
That's pretty neat. We actually, funny story, Cliff Anderson, who had done graphics for a ton of years, him and his dad, with Forward Design, and hand lettered all the cars up in the Bloomington area for, well, again, he could say better than I could the year ranges, but they did a bunch of graphic work, and he just brought by a suitcase that my grandpa had given him here. It was probably 10 or 15 years ago.
That's not me, Colin.
But the suitcase was full of my grandpa's old newspaper clippings and photos from back in the day. I mean, this was only 2 weeks ago that he brought it by. It was pretty cool reading some of the stuff that, back in his heyday, basically before he got older and started to struggle a little bit. He did pretty well with the guys and through the 70s, and then kind of cool to see that my grandpa won on the same night as my dad a couple times, and just kind of neat to see all that old stuff. And that was pretty cool to see some of the racing history. I mean, the one track paid $600 to win every night in 1969, and that would be equivalent to just under $5,000 today. And I'm like, whoa, that is unheard of. So no surprise why the grandstands were full in every picture, and there were tons of cars, 40, 50 cars. So that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, that was something I found today earlier too, when I was looking at Ultimate Racing history, that your grandpa finished 11th at Marshfield Fairgrounds in an IMCA stock car race in 1965. So that's pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, news to me. That is neat.
Yeah, I agree. He didn't talk about some of that stuff from way back. And I remember the state fair races, little. I didn't get to go to a lot of them. I think he got fifth in one of the races at the fair back when it was 500 laps. And I might have been fifth or seventh. That's been a long time. Anyway, he didn't finish the last 10 laps because his water pump pulley broke and it overheated, but there was only about 5 cars running at that point at 500 laps at Soda. So he ended up with a pretty good finish, but that was back when they had Ramo Stott and Ernie Durr and all the big guys from Iowa that ran USAC and IMCA and stuff like that.
Cool.
So, Steve, what is that like to be a racer yourself, growing up with it, with your dad racing, and now your son's racing and you're not? So do you find yourself kind of looking and thinking, do you give advice to Nick, or do you find yourself wanting to let him find his own way? How does that work with the two of you?
Sorry, your cat's trying to intrude.
Nick's done a good job, and some of my advice is okay, but not all of it, based on times have changed, and I'm kind of old school stuff. Although now and then he goes, maybe that wasn't bad as I thought it was, as far as the advice goes.
Yeah.
And that's, everybody does things a different way, and some things aren't ideal by engineering standards, and Nick likes to go by ideal. And sometimes you go a little hillbilly and it works okay. And he's adapted to the hillbilly stuff a little more now that he's been around a little more. But I enjoy helping. Once I got old enough to where I couldn't perform at the level I really enjoyed performing at, I had no problem just turning over the reins and letting him, do it. And I've been so busy at the shop here that I don't get the time that I used to. My brothers used to help.
Busy. Yeah.
Well, this is more of a stress thing here, but again, as we got busier and busier, I just had less time to work on stuff, and I had young children that I had to provide for, and so my focus has shifted a little bit away from trying to be a superstar and trying to be a dad. And so then I just had to change my role and be more of a provider and so on. So my goal here is to help make money and keep the operation going so we can afford race car stuff best we possibly can. That's about it there. I enjoy working hard, and my goal is to be able to get down and help Nick on weekends when I can.
Nice. Well, racing is an inherently dangerous sport. It just is. There's a lot of safety involved. But I know that you had a pretty bad wreck in Nashville, Steve, and that actually impacted and affected change in just how the chassis are built even too. What is that like for you to know that you had a terrible injury, but yet it also impacted the increase in safety? That was a pretty big deal.
Well, yeah, any safety improvements are great. It's kind of funny how they don't really realize certain things until they analyze, tragedies, accidents, so on. For instance,
reactive.
Reactive to the problem. When Dale Earnhardt died, they upgraded the seats and the Hans devices and stuff like that. And people running around on the short tracks, I was surprised more people didn't get hurt worse and so on. And I never really thought about the impact of the car change. I just wanted to get back and race, which it's kind of like a bull rider gets kicked off and is determined to get back on there and do better. And that was my goal. Actually, probably helped my recovery more than anything, was to have that focus to get back in the car and go back and race.
That's pretty cool. Nick, have you ever had any kind of a scary wreck to that point where you maybe were like, ooh, I better get back on that horse and keep going?
No, not necessarily. You wreck stuff, but nothing where I thought that I would, be nervous to race again or anything like that. And all that, again, for me to come into it in this day and age with safety and the track safety, not to mention the car safety, I got kind of lucky. I mean, I still have the same Hans device I started when I was 15. So, I kind of got pretty lucky when I came into it in that respect. It can still be dangerous, no doubt. But for the most part, I've been pretty lucky. And again, unfortunately for everybody else who had to learn the hard way, it's a tough deal. But I'm thankful for the improvements that we've made throughout the time. And again, you kind of take it for granted these days. Actually, Michael Hager had a pretty bad crash down in La Crosse in a limited late model race this last summer, and I went up and looked at his car afterwards, and I was astonished to see how short that one was. And if Brett actually broke the block, it was one of our engines. It cracked the block. I mean, it like split the block. It was impressive, and I mean, he, again, you think, oh, it's a limited late model. How hard can he really crash? But that one was pretty eye opening, and he was lucky, just bruised up a little bit. But again, the safety improvements have come so far. Without a Hans device, that would have been pretty ugly. And the engine came back into the foot box actually. Just
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of eye opening. So again, I think we're all kind of lucky to be racing now. We take for granted how safe the cars really are. And then after seeing that, it kind of puts a little perspective back into what we do. But especially growing up with my dad, obviously, was pretty aware of all the safety precautions. And we always like to build ultra safe cars. We typically get a car. We're in left-handers back in the day, and we get cars and add bars to them before they ever hit the track, because we got a living reminder of how dangerous it could be, I guess you could say.
I was going to say, for those who don't know, Steve, can you explain what happened in the injury, or for your injury, what happened?
Well, I got into the inside guardrail, and of course, the guardrail was overlapped the wrong way, so it separated and sheared off the bars on the left front corner of the car, and basically crushed it up so bad that broke both my legs. And they really wanted to amputate both of them when I was in Nashville, but the one was really bad, so they amputated that and put some screws in my right foot and sent me back up to Minneapolis, where they did another surgery on my ankle and took some bone off my hip and some plates and screws and put it kind of back together. So it works. It's not great, but it's been better than an artificial leg for this last 35 years, and allowed me to race again. Would have been pretty tough with two artificial legs. The clutch is bad enough when you can't tell where your foot is necessarily, with no feeling. But again, I just adapted and did what I had to do.
Amazing.
I did see one Nick Murgic wreck that was frightening to watch when you won the Dixieland and went right on into the wall. So I mean, that looked frightening, but evidently getting the checkered flag made it not hurt as much, I'm guessing.
I wasn't very happy about it. That's for sure. I knew it was going to be ugly as I was going down the front stretch. Actually, it was really lucky. They had, again, track improvement. They had a big foam barrier that I hit driver's side instead of the wall. I had no front brake, so it was all rear brake when I came to it. And they'd been fading pretty bad leading up to that point. Actually, a funny story, with like 7 to go, I think there was a caution. I had a decent enough lead up until then, where I could kind of float it into the corner, pump the brakes up. You leave in the corner all the way down the straightaway, get just enough brake to get into the corner. And I had to restart. It was single file, luckily, or it would probably wreck half the field. But I figured the caution, great, I'll pump the brakes up, get them cooled down. We had a pretty good car. I'm like, it's over, get a good start. We ran around a couple laps and I'm pumping them up and I'm like, gosh, this is really not coming back. So I tell Joe on the radio, I'm like, there's some debris in turn 3, it better send the truck out. And I'm thinking, I'm leading the race. They got to listen to me, right? So they send the truck out, couldn't find anything. I got like 2 more caution laps. I'm thinking a couple more laps, I'll have brake pedal back, no problem. Well, it turns out I'd melted the O-ring out of the caliper piston on the right front. So I was never getting that pedal back, but I got a decent start and was able to float around for a few laps when Casey was right on my tail. And I twitched up getting into 3 on the last lap and got out of 4, but by the time I started pumping the brakes, nothing was happening. Basically, it was the end of life. So could have happened a lap sooner. It could have been in the wall, but Kakana's funny enough because the front start finish line is so far offset into the corner, and with me twitching up and Casey getting a run to the inside, you got to drive through the start finish line where I normally was lifting well before the line. So then I get to the brakes and it just locked up. I'm like, oh, this is ugly. But if it wasn't for the foam barrier, it wrecked a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
I was going to say that car had to have been dang near totaled. I mean, that was a heck of a hit.
Yeah, I mean, rear end tube, couple shocks, front stub, most of the body. It was, and I mean, like that was, again, it was technically light compared to if it was concrete or something. So, yeah, that one wasn't that bad though. I was more disappointed that I wrecked the car because the car was so good. I thought we could build off of it, but then we fought the rest of the year getting it back straight. So, and then we fought the next 3 years chasing brakes because I thought I could come up with something better, but
It's good to experiment though.
oh yeah, you run around and catch the one at Madison. We swapped brake fluids, and of course the rear piston's locked up. Once it got hot and I was leading the Triple Crown, I had a straightaway lead and brakes started getting hot and just I had to pull in. Like Jeremy Miller got by me and it wasn't any fun basically experimenting. So what not to do?
Well, some people can write a book on all the things not to do. So
yeah, I'm sure most racers can.
And now, Nick, I remember, I think you started in the short trackers is when I first recall. Did you do carts, quarter midgets, anything like that, other than racing around the shop?
Yeah, I did quarter midget around on the front parking lot of the shop for a little bit. Never did get the car to the track, but no, just driving around the shop. And my dad ran Saturday and Sunday at Elko and Raceway. So, and then they do the quarter midgets on Sunday mornings, and never got it out there, which, was okay. So yeah, that's a funny story too. We bought this short tracker and it was actually a really well-built car. And we were going to build an engine for it just to get something reliable. They changed the Raceway Park schedule that year. Elko, it typically started like a week or 2 weeks after Elko. Well, then it was kind of before the internet. It wasn't before the internet, but before we were capable of running the internet around here. Somebody comes in and go, "Are you ready for Raceway or racing this weekend?" And like, "What are you talking about?" "Oh yeah, the opening night's this weekend." And we didn't know. So that came with an engine. It was like a Golfer rebuild, more or less a Jasper equivalent engine. We tossed it in there and I went out to my first night, got the 2 couple lap practice sessions and went and raced. So that was that was all that started. No practice besides the couple before you get to the heat race. So it was pretty cool. I got lapped, but I got out of the way and gave the leaders a chance to race. And again, I was pretty aware of what I was doing with the mirrors. I'd been driving for 6-8 years at that point. So that wasn't a big deal, but yeah, it was, I guess at that point, then I was kind of hooked. And that next year I got a Mid-Am car. I won two features that summer. Was pretty well in the top 3 towards the end of the year. Man, those cars were fun. And he barely had to work on anything, just go race them. We bought 6 tires the whole year. The 4 we started on, and then 2 right sides from a guy who ended up wrecking and didn't need his tires anymore. So that was some fun. But next year I got a mid-am car and ran at Elko where we could both be there on a Saturday night. And that was basically, I started welding on my own car at that point, doing all the work, front end geometry stuff. I'd stay up late. Back then I could stay up late and still function, but running geometry programs back when I was 14, I suppose at the time, trying to figure out a good front end geometry. And I don't know, I didn't really know what I was doing. I still probably don't, but.
How old were you when you started?
I was 14 in the short tracker, and then
Okay.
that was when we built the sportsman car.
It's kind of, I remember when Dean Cornelius started racing, because like the first 3 years in the short trackers at Raceway, every year they'd announce him as 16-year-old Dean
Yeah.
Cornelius.
Yep. They had to do that for a little while, I know.
Yeah.
I think
That's
I just snuck into where they were okay with a little more of the younger kids getting into it at that point. Obviously, like I think at the time, I'm thinking Chase Elliott was probably racing late models down south, but my dad told John Hellendrung if I did anything stupid, he'd be the first one to pull me out of the car. They won't have to track calling or anything like that. And I was well aware. I grew up around the shop here and just kind of knew my place for the most part.
Yeah, kind of a funny story about his first feature at a Raceway in the short tracker. I mean, he didn't have much experience, and we hadn't raced that car. I knew had driven it, but him and a 50-year-old were having a really good race in the back, and the leaders are coming, and me and my buddy Brad Miller are sitting in the stands watching, and as the leaders got closer, we thought, well, hopefully you'll get out of the way. And the 50-year-old guy is right in the middle of the track, and Nick pulls down, let the leaders go by. And Brad says, he'll be okay.
Steve, how old were you when you started racing?
I was 17 when I started. I graduated from high school, and I'd helped my dad for quite a while. Probably not as long as Nick had, because Nick has been around the shop forever. And I didn't really start getting into the garage till I was like 12 or 13. And all I really got to do was sand on Bondo.
Well, you got to start somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, and it got me involved, and I started learning, obviously, not quite as much as like when I was racing when I was young. My brother Pete, he's 12 years old, and he's rebuilding my brake calipers on my super late model, stuff like that. And he's been helping. I mean, he still helps now at this point. He's a bachelor, so he's not committed to a lot of things. Anyway, he at the time he was 12, we need to get ready to go out of town racing, and he'd pull the brake calipers off, take them apart, clean them up, put them back together, because the race car to sit outside during the week and it rained, or they got a little rusty. We wanted to make sure the calipers work good. That was just kind of a normal maintenance thing at that point. Now, when we got the newer shop here, we were able to keep the car inside, and we worked on the late model here and the modified 4 we had that we ran a Raceway at the house. And as things got busier and busier there, we just had less time for race cars. And it was when Nick started there, and we worked on both cars, but that was tough. So then I decided to just give it up and focus on his career.
I remember asking you a couple years ago out at Elko, because I know you raced against your dad, so I asked if you had raced against Nick, and you said no, and I said, well, there's still time, and you said no, I've already destroyed enough stuff in my career.
Well, as you get older, you're just not as good. I mean, I know there's some people that do pretty well when they're old, but when I started losing some of my night vision, my peripheral sight, stuff like that, that was just automatic for me, and I just wasn't as sharp or as good. And then I didn't have the time to work on the cars like I did when I was younger. Just like, I'll focus on helping Nick, and he's got the skills and talent, and I'd rather get out of the way and make room for the youngsters.
I
Nice.
remember a few years back, Kevin Noodleman unretired down at lacrosse for a few weeks there, and at the time, I was pretty excited. Kevin, kind of a hero to myself, and so that was pretty cool to see him. And I asked him about it a couple years later, and he's like, too old. I don't have it anymore. That was pretty funny. But yeah, again, I think just once you kind of realize that you're not, obviously my dad and Kevin, they were both very good at one point. I think it's hard to show back up and not drive to the front, or at least be ultra competitive. So I get it. I'm guessing my racing career won't be as long as some, but again, I'd like to do well while I can, and after that, if I don't do as well, vision, reaction time, whatever it be, I'm not going to hang out and run around to 10th anytime. It's not for me.
So do you have a schedule set for 2023, Nick, what you're going to be doing?
Oh boy. Well, they got 2 sanctions basically for dirt modifieds. So modifieds you can run pretty much anywhere. Turns out that's all kind of new to me, so I'm learning as I go. But I built the Wasota car last year, thinking they're a little less power. They have kind of a little more limited. I figured it'd be a great starter division, even though it's still a modified, which they're in the 600 horsepower range on an 8-inch tire, so they can be a handful. But I built that car and ended up going down to Deer Creek a bunch, which is USRA. Just ended up being an easier drive, and really liked going down there. So I'll be switching over to USRA sanction and probably focus down at the Deer Creek area for the most part. I don't plan for running for points. I'm not that good yet. So just try to get as many races as possible. And they have the USMTS, which is the modified touring series that kind of stays between Texas and Minnesota. They come up here a bunch during the summer, and that's kind of a neat deal. It pays really well. Each night they do separate events. They'll be at a track Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I'd like to get to a few of those. Obviously Deer Creek would be one, and then Cedar Lake does I think it's during the Masters weekend. Again, it's all kind of new to me, but it's a different challenge. I think that's kind of exciting. It can be close to home within an hour, and I don't know. I just kind of play it by ear. I'd like to race a little more than I did last year. I got committed helping some people. It's a lot of fun to help out, but at the same time, then it kind of I sacrifice my program, and there are a couple races where I would race and then take a month off and then race again, and it's just like almost restarting. So that just isn't going to cut it if I want to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think I could run well. Nick Beninsky's raced dirt late model a bit the last few years and done pretty well. But the learning curve it's just so far different. And before I started changing the car, I wanted to make sure I knew how to drive it a little bit. And I still don't know how to drive it, but I'm getting the hang of it. And, it's something else that, I can tell you, getting up on the cushion by the wall, it's a completely different sensation that you just don't get on asphalt. I mean, you're like, even when you think you're fully comfortable, you're a little bit nervous. And on asphalt, you tend to have a little bit of comfort in the fact that you can save it. But when you're almost fully locked to the right on a good corner, it doesn't take much more to just spin you out. So it's just a different challenge. At least the body panels are tin, so you can hammer those back out.
Well, and you're getting ready for another new experience here this year. You are engaged to Cheyenne Stanfield.
Yep. That should be fun. We've been living together for a few years now, so I like to tell her that nothing's going to change, but I'm probably wrong.
Oh, you're in for a nice awakening.
she's very helpful at the track. She was my main crew person for the most part. Boy, she was pretty mad when I told her I was getting a dirt car because she'd grown up on asphalt her entire life. And
Oh, she's a racer too.
yep. We actually got her a B mod this year as well. We were gonna do some asphalt for her, and then just the logistics obviously weren't gonna work out because she's my crew. So so that'll be kind of interesting. It should be fun. Again, the panels pound out, I tell her, so not too big a deal, but no, it's good. She's very helpful and supportive with racing, which is great because obviously most of us racers are completely nuts when it comes to working on cars every night. People look at us like we're crazy. So yeah, it should be fun. Looking forward to it. We're getting married this fall after race season, so got that figured out at least.
Yeah.
Dayton's starting to help too.
Yeah, yep. Cheyenne's son Dayton, he's been coming with, which is kind of neat on dirt. So they really are open with the age limit getting in the pits. I know asphalt's been kind of leaning more towards that direction, but on dirt it's just normal apparently. And he's had a lot of fun helping scrape mud or put on mud plugs or whatever, anything he can do. He's really excited about it. So that's been cool getting him involved. He'd rather come into the shop and work on something now than do homework. So we got to work on that a little bit, but
Kind of cool though. It's kind of cool.
it is cool to see him excited about it. On asphalt, he'd have to sit in the stands and, he didn't get to be behind the scenes. So it's pretty cool that it puts a smile on his face when he can, do something on the car and then like go out and watch it race. And so, I like to teach him a little bit. And he's actually fairly decent at fabricating some stuff, which is pretty impressive for 11 years old. But I guess now that you're saying Pete was doing it by 12, I expect a little more.
I did like earlier when we started this, when you were so casual about how you started driving at 8. Most people don't do that.
It was a manual too. It was a Pontiac Le Mans.
Wow. A boat and a stick.
Yeah.
No,
There was like a 90, or it was not a nice one.
it was really short. It wasn't the big old boat Pontiac Le Mans. It was a 4-cylinder, little teeny, like it was an odd deal. But it needed some work, and the customer didn't want to spend any money on it, so we just use it as, we call them field racers. And
We had a pretty good little track going behind the shop, but they moved the road on us, really cramped our style. But we used to race them around the shop. We had a little track. I don't know, couldn't even have been an 8th mile. Whatever we could get that would run, didn't matter what it was. We'd have cars out there. And yeah, they had this manual Pontiac Le Mans, and I had to have a hubcap, a phone book, a couple other things to seat all the way forward. I couldn't see what I was doing, but yeah, I'd drive a little manual Le Mans around, and it was just normal to me. I didn't know any different. I wanted to get a farm license when I was 14 because at that point I'd already been driving for 6 years roughly.
Wow. That just blows my mind. Blows my mind.
I couldn't have done much damage to the car, that's for sure. It wasn't that nice, but that's what made it fun. We used to bomb around the field my sister would drive too, and we'd go for hours. I mean, that's all we wanted to do was drive old junkers around.
I want to go fast, Daddy.
I did end up years later hitting a tree down here. The bottom of the driveway, it was pretty icy out. That was front wheel drive, so it was a little bit harder. You had to use the e-brake, and it was icy, so I get a nice slide going. And I had a kind of a course where I'd slide, come around the back, and then I'd pitch it the other direction twice and go around the tree, lap after lap. And when we came in, ate some pizza, went back out, and I think I didn't really feel the track out, but it got a bit icier, and I sailed it in sideways and hit the A post right above my head on the tree. branch and it blew the windshield out. I was pretty disappointed I wrecked my car. Then we took it back in, pulled the windshield out, and went back out driving, I guess, in the snow. Yeah.
Oh, the
Hey.
joys of growing up in a racing family. I mean, seriously, other kids never would have had that kind of fun.
No, I mean, it was basically a farm, more or less. We were outskirts of town at the time, and yeah, you could do pretty much whatever you wanted, and it was a lot of fun.
I'm not sure that was his car when he crashed it. However, it
Well,
was our buddy Joey Garofalo's kind of a beater. So it wasn't ideal.
Well-
Joey is a pretty good sport about it in general, though. So
we'd go around with booster packs, and we knew which cars were junkers. Well, he showed up one day with this Nissan Maxima and ran a couple laps and parked it. He pulled the battery cable off. Well, we'd pop the hood and look, and jump them if we needed to, or yeah, the battery cable's off. Hook it back up and go take off. I thought it was fair game. I didn't know at the time that he wanted to drive it on the road. Now after that, I had to mow some lawns. That was pretty fun.
oh god, yeah, with Nick and Katie and their little buddy Zach Miller, Brad's son. They'd have a two-wheeler with a booster pack on, and they go out to these cars and try to get them running so they could go around and run around the little track in the field. They put their helmets on, and one time Katie's friend Michelle came over, and Katie and Michelle are both blondes, and they're in the back seat, their helmets on, bobbing around, and it was kind of a rough track, and Nick's driving, and they put 5 miles on this little track around there the one afternoon there. And he learned a lot. One time he had his old hockey coach here, and I think it took him for a ride in his McQuarrie, and it was icy out there. Nick was wailing it into the corner, and I'm pretty sure Rick just about had a heart attack right up by the edge of the berm and back the other way. It was pretty funny.
He might have had a racing stripe in his shorts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was a lot more fun. We were actually, when it snows out like this and you got your modern vehicles with traction control and anti-lock brakes and nothing fun basically. And we got our old plow truck and I hop in it. I'm like, man, this reminds me of the good old days when we could go have some fun.
Sideways.
Yep. Kids will never know these days. They're not going to have that much fun driving.
There's a statement right there for sure. For sure.
Oh, you
So-
know, tell after it snowed and come down our road, and there'd be these swervy tire tracks in the fresh snow. Yeah, Nick's here.
How is the Murgic racing engine business going?
We were real busy. We're not doing as many race engines as we had been. We're doing a lot of classic engine rebuilding. 69 Boss 302. We've got a 67 Buick 400, 65 Pontiac GTO 389 with 3 2 barrels. They're all in the process here. So yeah, business is good. Unfortunately, the crate engines are really good for the racers to keep the costs down, and I encourage it. I really do. And I kind of a soft spot for racers, so I don't tend to make as much money on those engines as I do on the classic rebuilds. So those are kind of more of my favorite thing to do because they don't have to make gobs of power. They just have to run really good and not leak. And it's just, we have a real good clientele there for some of the Ford engines. We've done several 428s and some 351s, and Foster 2 went out here actually a couple weeks ago, and that's tougher to make everything look perfect, and some of it's 40 or 50-year-old stuff that you have to resurrect, but it's been very good. And I like the race engines, but some of the parts availability has been a little tougher here, not as much right now as the last year or two, but Yeah, I might be getting older and crankier here, so I'm
Well,
trying to get enough money together to retire eventually.
Well, speaking of the Murgic engines, were you back when you and your dad, were racing, were you guys building your own engines back in those days?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I was talking to Bob Fredrickson and Steve Vermeer this past weekend and hearing some of the stories of in the cast iron intake and exhaust days and some of the shenanigans that took place with like milled down and epoxied together cast iron and aluminum and metal coated aluminum. Were you guys involved? That statute of limitations is over. So were you involved in any of those shenanigans?
That's a funny story here. I think I might be a little slow. I was recently watching some podcasts from some of the NASCAR shenanigans, as you're speaking with, for the various cheating that they're doing. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm the only one that wasn't cheating up all this stuff there. Slow. Yeah, we pushed the envelope, and if there wasn't any rules written, believe me, we would go all in on any latitudes there. One point at Raceway Park, they omitted a line in the engine section about not having angle milled heads. And the tech guys said, oh, we're going to take the heads off and check them for being angle milled. And I said, don't bother. I can tell you they are because I did it myself. And they go, oh. So I said, well, that's not legal. I said, well, it doesn't say that in the rule book. They spent about a half hour looking at the rule book and they couldn't find that line in there. They let me go. But we tried to be really good. And after watching these podcasts here the last couple of weeks, I'm going like, must be stupid.
Some of the stuff you find out after the fact, like you say, statute of limitations, people let stuff fly, and you're like, wait a second, like we brought a knife to a gunfight more or less. Like, geez, might have been a lot easier to pass if we would have known.
I have to admit there, when you said about Bob Fredrickson, when he tacked, he did a good job, and I was confident that everybody was on the up and up. But I did get DQ'd for stupid stuff, like I had an aluminum hub in my stock pressure plate, which it wasn't as clear in the rules as I didn't think it was as clear in the rules. So maybe it was good on my part. But sure enough, I just got it, and I think that next week he's teching them. Can you believe that? Sure enough, I ended up with it, and I got DQ'd.
He ended up with it.
What are the odds, really? Right?
Yeah, I don't know if somebody nerfed me out or what that deal was there, but Bob did a great job, and I really liked back in Wisconsin when Clem did the teching, because he knew a lot about everything, and he'd walk down the line with this little stick and tap on your nose if it was too low, or tap on your spoiler if you didn't like it. Didn't even say much. Ask Clem, I'm gonna fix that. No problem. But the really good tech guys made me happy that with the playing field was level as much as possible, and that always made me feel like I wasn't, competing against a bunch of cheaters. And sometimes I think they lost that part of it there. I mean, most of the teching seems like more of an act or a show of like we're trying here, but I don't really think they're as good as they could be. Like when guy from down south, Ricky Brooks, came up to lacrosse for the Oktoberfest. He might be a little too far the one direction because they're worried about an 1/8 inch of roof height on these part-time racers that barely get the cars together. But at least the people that were cheating, I'm pretty sure they weren't cheating when Ricky's around.
Yeah.
There's truth in that statement. That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, guys, thanks so much for taking time to hang out with us and share some really fun stories. Really appreciate you guys taking part in this. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
And just in time to answer your phone.
Yeah. That was fun. No problem.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.